The geometry of missile defense is fundamentally a geometry of angles. The layered architecture that a guided missile destroyer carries. SM-2 for the outer ring against air-breathing threats. SM-6 for the extended outer ring with its active seeker flexibility. ESSM for the inner ring. CIWS for the terminal layer, is built around a threat model that assumes a specific angular relationship between the inbound contact and the ship's defensive systems. That angular relationship is horizontal, or near horizontal. Sea-skimming drones and cruise missiles approach from the surface plane. Ballistic missiles, in the trajectories that the engagement doctrine addresses most thoroughly, re-enter the atmosphere at steep angles that the SM-3 is designed to address in the exo-atmospheric phase, intercepting warheads above the atmosphere before they can complete their terminal descent. The theater ballistic missile defense architecture works because it catches the warhead while it is still in its predictable mid-course trajectory, before the terminal phase's compressed timeline makes surface-based intercept increasingly difficult. What the doctrine had not fully addressed. What the engagement that developed in the Central Persian Gulf at 3:08 a.m. would force the fleet's doctrine and tactics community to examine with new urgency. Was the specific case of a ballistic missile launched on a lofted trajectory from extremely close range, not a theater ballistic missile with a range of hundreds of miles, whose mid-course phase lasted minutes. A short-range ballistic missile, launched from a position on the Iranian coastline, approximately 63 nautical miles to the north, on a trajectory whose design intent was not to maximize range, but to maximize terminal approach angle. A trajectory that sent the warhead almost straight up before bringing it almost straight down. The physics of a lofted short-range ballistic trajectory produce a terminal approach geometry that is categorically different from the horizontal and shallow angle threats that the destroyer's organic defensive systems were optimized for. A warhead arriving at the ship's position from nearly directly overhead approaches from an angular sector that is above the primary engagement arcs of the SM-2 and ESSM, weapons whose guidance geometries are designed for targets approaching at angles close to the horizontal plane. The CIWS radar, whose engagement geometry is optimized for sea level and low-altitude threats, has a field of regard that covers the surface and near-surface engagement envelope effectively, but whose near-zenith sector is outside its designed primary coverage. The SPY-1D radar's track coverage includes zenith, but the fire control solutions built from near-zenith tracks require engagement geometries that most of the ship's weapons cannot produce efficiently. The ballistic missile defense asset assigned to the formation was the SM-3, carried in the VLS cells of the cruiser operating 41 nautical miles to the northwest, positioned specifically to provide the theater ballistic missile defense coverage that the destroyers SM-2 and SM-6 inventories could not replicate. The cruiser's SM-3 was the correct weapon for the engagement. Its exo-atmospheric intercept capability and its kinetic kill vehicle were designed precisely for the ballistic threat profile that the incoming warhead represented. At 3:08 a.m. and 40 seconds, the Aegis radar network registered the launch signature from the Iranian coastline, not from a fixed coastal battery position, from a mobile launcher. The thermal bloom of the launch consistent with a road-mobile ballistic missile system operating from a pre-surveyed firing position in the coastal terrain. That radar topography and line-of-sight geometry had placed outside the formation's direct radar horizon until the moment of launch. The launch signature appeared as the missile cleared the coastal terrain feature that had been masking it, and the radar systems of the Northern Formation assets acquired its thermal plume. The Aegis system classified the launch in approximately 2 seconds. Short-range ballistic missile, trajectory lofted, apogee estimate consistent with a range-optimized loft that was trading downrange distance for terminal approach angle. The fire control solution for the SM-3 engagement built in 7 seconds. The cruiser's TAO had engagement authorization from the formation commander within 12 seconds of the launch signature. The SM-3 launched at 3:09 a.m. and 3 seconds. 23 seconds from launch detection to first interceptor airborne. The SM-3 climbed. Its boost phase carried it out of the atmosphere on a trajectory designed to place the kill vehicle in the predicted path of the inbound warhead's mid-course arc. The Aegis network maintained continuous track on both the inbound warhead and the SM-3 kill vehicle. the data link between the cruiser and the destroyer feeding the track picture to both ships simultaneously. The warhead was at apogee, its highest point, approximately 118 kilometers altitude. When the SM-3's kill vehicle reached its intercept geometry, the intercept failed. Not a dramatic failure, not a guidance system collapse, or a kill vehicle malfunction. A geometry failure. The warhead's apogee was 17 kilometers lower than the trajectory analysis had predicted from the available launch signature data. The mobile launcher's firing position, the specific propellant load of the missile, and the trajectory optimization that the IRGCN's planners had applied to maximize terminal angle had produced a flight profile whose apogee was outside the SM-3's computed intercept window, by a margin that the kill vehicle's terminal correction capability could not close. The kill vehicle passed through the predicted intercept volume. The warhead was not there. The cruiser's Aegis system registered the miss and immediately began building a second SM-3 intercept solution. The warhead was now past apogee and in its terminal descent phase, dropping through the upper atmosphere at rapidly increasing velocity, its approach angle steepening toward near vertical as the descent progressed. A second SM-3 was possible, but the terminal descent geometry was closing the available intercept window rapidly. The warhead was at 62 kilometers altitude and descending. The second SM-3 launched at 3:09 a.m. and 51 seconds. Its kill vehicle climbing toward the rapidly converging intercept geometry. The second SM-3 kill vehicle reached its intercept point at 41 kilometers altitude. The warhead was there. The kill vehicle impacted, but not at the center of the warhead body. The terminal velocity of the descending warhead had placed it 1.8 meters ahead of the kill vehicle's precise intercept point, and the kinetic energy transfer of the impact was sufficient to fragment the warhead's outer casing and destroy its guidance electronics, but was not sufficient to achieve complete structural disintegration of the warhead body. The warhead's reentry vehicle, the hardened inner structure that protected the actual payload through atmospheric reentry, survived the kill vehicle impact, structurally intact. It continued its terminal descent, now unguided, the guidance electronics destroyed by the SM-3 intercept, but the re-entry vehicle's ballistic trajectory carrying it toward the surface on the approach geometry that the initial loft had established. An unguided re-entry vehicle from a short-range ballistic missile, descending at terminal velocity from 41 kilometers, is not a precision weapon. Without guidance, the impact point is defined entirely by the ballistic trajectory. At the moment, guidance was lost. The approach vector that the warhead was flying when the SM-3 hit it. That vector was aimed at the destroyer's position, as it had existed at the moment of the missile's launch. The destroyer was no longer at that position. It had been maneuvering since the launch detection, and its current position was approximately 1.2 nautical miles from the position the warhead was now descending toward on its fixed ballistic arc. 1.2 nautical miles. The unguided re-entry vehicle impacted the surface of the Persian Gulf, 1.2 nautical miles from the destroyer's hull at 3:10 a.m. and 17 seconds. The impact producing a water column that was visible on the ship's radar as a brief return from the displaced water. A return that was different in character from any wave return, and that the radar operator identified immediately for what it was before it subsided and the surface picture returned to its ambient state. 37 seconds from the SM-3. Missed to the warhead's surface impact. 37 seconds during which the destroyer had continued maneuvering, during which the Aegis network had been tracking the unguided re-entry vehicle's descent and projecting its impact point, and during which the watch team in the CIC had been watching a ballistic warhead fall toward the Gulf's surface from nearly directly overhead, and had nothing to intercept it with that could reach it in time. The CIWS azimuth limit was the specific technical problem. A near-vertical approach geometry, the re-entry vehicle arriving at angles between 70 and 85 degrees from horizontal in its terminal phase, placed the inbound contact above the CIWS, mounts maximum elevation angle for its fire control tracking. The CIWS could track near-zenith targets in its search mode, but its engagement mode elevation limit was mechanically set below the angle required to track a contact arriving from near-vertical geometry. The mount could not elevate its barrel to the angle required to engage a contact arriving from above 68 degrees elevation. The SM-2 and ESSM had the same problem from a different direction. Both weapons' guidance geometries assumed a target approaching from the horizontal plane or at angles that kept the engagement geometry within the weapon's designed intercept envelope. A near-vertical warhead descent created a terminal intercept geometry, where the guidance system's homing algorithm was operating at the edge of its designed angular range. An edge that the standard engagement planning process had not fully characterized for this specific trajectory type. What this meant, operationally, was that the destroyer had watched a ballistic warhead fall toward the surface of the Gulf from overhead, without a clean intercept solution available from any weapon in its organic inventory. The SM-3 was the answer to this threat, and the SM-3 had achieved a partial success at 41 kilometers that had saved the ship by destroying the warhead's guidance system, converting a precision strike into an unguided ballistic fall, whose impact point was displaced 1.2 nautical miles by the destroyer's maneuvering. 1.2 nautical miles. The margin between a miss and a hit was the distance the ship had put between itself and its original position in the 70 seconds from launch detection to impact. 70 seconds of maximum speed maneuvering at the destroyer's best speed, approximately 500 meters per minute, had displaced the ship approximately 580 meters from its detection moment position. The launch position and the loft trajectory had aimed the warhead at the ship's detection moment position, and the 580-meter displacement had been enough, combined with the SM-3's destruction of the guidance electronics, to carry the impact point past the hull by 1.2 nautical miles, 580 meters of maneuvering, 1.2 nautical miles of safety margin. The numbers were both large and small in ways that the post-engagement analysis would examine with the focused attention they deserved. At 3:10 a.m. and 35 seconds, the electronic warfare system registered a second launch signature from the Iranian coastline, different bearing from the first, offset approximately 7 degrees west of the initial launch position, consistent with a second mobile launcher that had been positioned at a different pre-surveyed firing point along the coastal terrain. Same trajectory profile, lofted, steep terminal angle, range optimized for approach geometry rather than distance, and 18 seconds after the second launch signature, from a third bearing offset 12 degrees east of the first position. A third launch, 3 mobile launchers, 3 separate firing positions distributed across the coastal terrain. The tactical design was now fully visible. The first missile had been the probe, testing the SM-3 engagement parameters and the destroyer's maneuvering response. The second and third missiles had been fired after observing the first engagement's outcome, not with the intent of overwhelming the SM-3 battery, whose reload cycle was faster than the 3 launch sequences' timing, but with the geometric intent of presenting the SM-3 with 2 simultaneous intercept problems from different approach angles, forcing the fire control geometry to address 2 trajectories simultaneously rather than sequentially. The cruiser's second SM-3 cell had been reloading since the second SM-3 launch against the first warhead. The reload was not yet complete. The VLS cell cycling sequence required approximately 90 seconds from the previous launch. The second warhead would reach its intercept window before the cruiser's second cell was available. The destroyer's own SM-3 inventory was the contingency that the formation's planning had identified as the backup for exactly this scenario. The destroyer carried 4 SM-3 cells in its VLS configuration, fewer than the cruiser, positioned as a secondary ballistic defense layer rather than the primary. 2 SM-3 interceptors launched from the destroyer at 3:10 a.m. and 58 seconds against the second inbound warhead, now at 73 kilometers altitude and descending toward its near-vertical terminal geometry. Both SM-3 interceptors reached the second warhead in the high atmosphere. The first kill vehicle impacted at 56 kilometers. The second impacted 3 seconds later at 49 kilometers. The double intercept was conclusive. The warhead's structural integrity did not survive 2 consecutive kinetic impacts from the SM-3's kill vehicles, and the reentry vehicle's hardened inner casing, which had survived the partial intercept of the first missile, was fractured by the second impact. The debris field scattered across the upper atmosphere. the fragments losing coherence as they entered the denser lower atmosphere and aerobraked into a dispersed footprint that impacted the water surface well north of the formation in a scatter of small, low-velocity fragments. Second warhead eliminated. Third warhead still inbound. The cruiser's reloaded SM-3 cell was available. The third warhead was at 81 kilometers altitude, past apogee, descending on its terminal trajectory. The cruiser launched at 3:11 a.m. in 22 seconds. One SM-3 kill vehicle, climbing toward the intercept geometry that the Aegis network had been computing since the third warhead's launch detection. Intercept at 63 kilometers. The kill vehicle's impact was geometrically centered. The Aegis system's fire control had used the lessons of the first engagement's miss to refine the trajectory prediction model for the third warhead, applying the same loft optimization logic that the first engagement had revealed, and adjusting the intercept solution for the lower than predicted apogee. The third warhead's reentry vehicle was destroyed completely. The debris field was not ballistically coherent. It posed no further threat. At 3:11 a.m. in 51 seconds, the Aegis network confirmed 3 warhead intercepts, 1 partial, 2 complete, and the radar picture was clear. 3 minutes and 11 seconds from first launch detection to final intercept confirmation. 3 mobile ballistic missile launchers, 3 separate firing positions, 3 warheads, 2 SM, 3 interceptors from the cruiser, 1 miss, 1 intercept, 2 SM, 3 interceptors from the destroyer against the second warhead, both intercepts, 1 additional SM-3 from the cruiser against the third warhead, intercept, 5 SM-3 interceptors expended, 4 successful intercept events, one of which had been a partial intercept that destroyed the guidance system but not the reentry vehicle, and had required the destroyer's maneuvering to complete the engagement outcome. The cost of 5 SM-3 interceptors, approximately $80 million. The estimated cost of 3 short-range ballistic missiles and 3 mobile launchers, approximately $15 to $20 million. A 4-to-1 cost ratio, not the extreme asymmetry of cheap drone attacks, but a ratio that reflected the fundamental economics of ballistic missile defense. The defensive interceptor cost was higher per round than any other element of the layered architecture. The offensive ballistic missile cost was lower than any SM-3 interceptor. Every ballistic missile engagement produced a negative cost ratio for the defender, regardless of the tactical outcome. The post-engagement analysis that 5th Fleet's ballistic defense team completed over the following 72 hours identified the near-vertical approach geometry as the specific element that warranted immediate doctrine revision. The CIWS elevation limit, the SM-2 and ESSM angular engagement constraints, and the SM-3 trajectory prediction model's sensitivity to the loft optimization technique that the IRGCN had employed. All 3 were flagged as areas where the existing doctrine had not fully characterized the engagement requirements for the close-range lofted trajectory threat. The mobile launcher's position, 63 nautical miles from the target, had produced a trajectory whose characteristics fell outside the most analyzed range band of the theater ballistic missile defense planning documents. The maneuvering margin finding was the element that the commanding officer chose to emphasize in his own post-engagement submission to 5th Fleet. The 1.2 nautical miles of safety margin that had converted a near hit into a clean miss had been generated by 70 seconds of maximum speed maneuvering from the moment of launch detection. 70 seconds. The margin was not passive. It had been produced by an active decision to maneuver at maximum available speed as soon as the ballistic trajectory had been classified. Before the intercept outcome was known, accepting the fuel expenditure and the course deviation in exchange for the kinetic separation that maneuvering created between the ship's current position and the position the warhead was aimed at. The commanding officer's observation was that the maneuvering decision had been a standard procedure, the normal response to a ballistic missile launch detection. It had been executed correctly, and it had contributed to the outcome. What his submission noted was that the contribution had been decisive, precisely because the SM-3's partial intercept had not fully destroyed the reentry vehicle, leaving a ballistic fragment whose impact point was determined by the ship's position relative to the original aim point. The maneuvering margin had been the insurance policy for the intercept's partial success. Without it, a partial SM-3 intercept against a near-vertical warhead would have produced a different result. The maneuvering was not brilliant tactics. It was trained doctrine, executed correctly, under pressure, in 70 seconds. That was what had mattered. The Persian Gulf's surface closed over the impact point of the first warhead's unguided re-entry vehicle and showed nothing. The formation resumed its operating posture. The SM-3 cells were in reload sequence. The intelligence community was already working to locate the 3 mobile launchers that had fired, a task whose difficulty reflected the specific operational advantage of mobile systems in terrain that provided radar shadow and concealment options that fixed installations could not replicate. The launchers were not found in the immediate post-engagement period. They had moved. They would fire again from different positions, at different times, against different ships or the same ships. That was the nature of mobile ballistic systems in the Gulf's coastal terrain. They moved, they hid, they re-emerged when the window was right. The formation's defense had worked on this night. The mobile launcher's existence meant the defense would need to work again. The watch continued. In the Gulf, the watch always continued, because the threats that had been addressed never fully went away. They adapted and waited and returned from different positions at different times, and the only answer to their patience was the sustained professional vigilance of people who understood what they were watching for and refused to stop watching.